Thank you, Hank, for those generous words, and coming from you and knowing of your long activism in the cause of peace and redirecting our resources where they can build America. I especially appreciate those words and take them as a challenge that I hope I can live up to. Thank you for inviting us here today, and thank you for organizing this forum. We are on a short leash here, as they say, and I'm sure Betsy will let me know if I'm straining that leash. I want to briefly touch on three things, and then we'll have a chance, I think, in the discussion to elaborate each of them if you wish. I want to first stress some of the questions of policy that are tied to these questions of spending. Secondly, I want to give a brief account of where the spending debate is now. And thirdly, I want to challenge you, because I do think that the two halves of your topic today, bring our war dollars home, restore our communities. The relationship of those two, as we said in Durham when we first were talking about this some months ago, those two things are not necessarily linked, and they're not going to be self-executing. Restoring our communities has a lot of obstacles in front of it, as well as besides the amount we're spending on defense, and those obstacles are going to have to be faced very squarely by people of goodwill who really want to change things in this country. First, on our foreign policy, our defense policy. Yes, we're spending too much, way too much, but it does matter how we're spending those dollars, what those dollars are being spent for. So the debate that you've been a part of, the debate that you've encouraged about our foreign policy, about our defense policy, is extremely important. It's linked to the spending. It's not just about the spending. Afghanistan. The President has announced a drawdown timetable. He now proposes to move earlier, 2013, the disengagement of combat forces and the shift to a train and advise role. Walter Jones has left, but I want to commend him and Jim McGovern, his Democratic colleague, for pushing this exit strategy, pushing to make it more explicit, pushing to make it more ironclad. And I have joined both in resolutions and in letters designed to do just that. I do think the question of governance, I commend to you a lengthy New York Times editorial yesterday morning about the challenge remaining in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The question of governance is an important one. It's a legitimate one. We can't simply wash our hands of Afghanistan and Pakistan and pretend that we have no national interest there and that there aren't things that we are going to need to attend to there. But this should be, as Hank referred to our past efforts, this should be a diplomatic matter, a matter of helping in whatever ways we can appropriately help to bring forth solid institutions of governance there. And that's what our House Democracy Partnership is actively engaged in this very week. There's a team in Afghanistan and Pakistan working with colleagues to build up the capacity of those parliamentary institutions so that they can govern and defend themselves and therefore be less dependent on us, but can also prevent sliding into a failed state kind of situation or prevent some kind of jeopardy to those ominous nuclear weapons sitting there in Pakistan and so forth. We engage in these debates on various levels. The Defense Authorization Bill Hank referred to. There was in the Defense Authorization Bill this year an open-ended declaration of hostilities based on the earlier declarations, but simply without end, without limit. That's why I voted against that bill. Fortunately, the final version of the Defense Authorization Act, thanks to the pressures from the Senate side, did not contain that open-ended authorization. But we need to be vigilant. And I'll stop with this. I won't give you the full list, but there are many, many areas of policy that we need to be engaged in because they are important in their own right and because they do affect these budget realities that you are focused on. So many in this room are actively engaged in the quest for Middle East peace, for example. Thank you for doing that. That's important, and as discouraging as it gets, we can't get Middle East fatigue. We've got to keep pressing for an enduring and fair settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. We have to have the right kind of foreign assistance. And by that I mean, yes, supporting good governance, supporting the right kind of economic development, supporting a healthier brand of education, supporting health to the world's poorest places, the HIV, AIDS, and malaria. You know, there are members of Congress who will never vote for a foreign aid bill of any description. I hope that's on your list. I don't see it explicitly here, but this isn't just a matter of shifting resources to domestic needs. It's a matter of the right kind of engagement with the rest of the world. That's also expected. Secondly, the questions of spending explicitly. We have had a rough year in the Congress this year. We've had government by crisis, a near shutdown in March, a near default crisis in July, and now patching it together to get some kind of recovery measure in place to hopefully accelerate and continue an economic recovery. One of the few positive things I can think of that came out of this was a projected limit on the defense side of the budget. That was a long time coming. You remember the March crisis didn't produce that. The March crisis came all out of domestic discretionary spending, the way that was resolved. The resolution that was reached in July did produce and is now producing a revised defense budget of by the tune of some $500 billion over the next 10 years. It will bring a number, thousands of those troops home from Europe. It will in various ways reorient our defense strategy. And as General Dempsey said the other night at Duke University, in many ways it's a positive thing to have less money to work with so as to focus priorities more explicitly. That's not over by any means, but there is progress on the defense spending front, and the pressure and the discussion, the debate needs to continue. Since my time's up, really, in some ways, my most important point is the third one. I'll just state it in a couple of sentences, and then maybe we can come back to it. I want to be as plain as I can be about this. And you're speaking truth to us. I want to speak some truth to you. This crisis we're facing in our country in terms of bringing our economy back, investing in our people, is not going to be addressed or solved simply by reducing the defense budget. If we reduce the defense budget 2 or 3 times as much as is now being discussed, this problem would not be solved. This problem has to be taken on its own merits, because what we are facing in this country is a political opposition, a relentless political opposition, that will oppose this president no matter what he proposes, that is mired in a pre-Herbert Hoover view of economics when it comes to bringing this economy back, and that simply will not budge on the critical question of taxation. Now, I hope and pray that as we rein in defense spending and have a defense budget that's more rationally tied to our legitimate national interests, I intend to work very hard on redirecting those resources where they need to go here at home. But I promise you, that will be a battle that continues and that requires independent effort, no matter what happens to the defense budget. So I think we need to be duly warned. Restoring our communities in this country is an enormous struggle. It's going to be an enormous struggle, and it's really the defining political struggle of this political year and maybe even of our generation. I'll just conclude with one point, just remind you of one thing. When it comes to these these crises and these near-death experiences that we've had at the national level over this last year. You ask yourself, how have they been resolved? Well, they've been resolved, unfortunately, with $1.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion in reductions from our domestic needs, our domestic appropriations, and the things that we care about in terms of things Paul was talking about: transportation, education, healthcare. Belatedly, $0.5 trillion in resolving this has come from the defense budget. $0.5 trillion has come from entitlements. That comes from the healthcare bill, taking the excess profits out of privatized Medicare programs and squeezing hospital and pharmaceutical reimbursements and so forth. What's wrong with that list? What's missing from that list?
Raising taxes.
Exactly. Exactly. The lesson we should learn from the successful efforts back in the 90s to balance our budget and to pay off hundreds of billions of our national debt. What happens time and time again is that these ideologues, now in charge of the House of Representatives, will say to us, we're not budging. We will never raise anyone's taxes. We will never close the first tax loophole. So now you folks go off and negotiate with yourselves and tell us how much you're willing to cut. I promise you that's what's happening. It's what's happened again. It's what's happened again with this payroll tax extension. The president is sick of it. I'm sick of it. You should be sick of it.
Yeah.
There should be no assumption, believe me, that what happens one place in the budget is automatically going to produce the kinds of results we want in the other. This is a defining struggle, and we've all got to be engaged in it. Thank you.